So as I was trying to say, I'm Duncan Dornan, Director of Glasgow Museums. I'll be chairing the session this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. This is a partnership activity between ICOM UK and NMDC, and we are going to explore the reopening of museums around the world. We are lucky to have contributors from India, Poland, Singapore and the UK, and we will look at key issues around reopening museums with an opportunity to discuss challenges and share lessons learned. I should emphasise, if you want to ask questions, that you can do so through the chat mechanism. We have a number of questions to kick off the themes, but you can contribute through that route as well. We're going to tackle 5 themes during the session, so we will have to keep moving reasonably quickly. I'd like to introduce our speakers, if I may. Ambika is joining us from India. She is the Professor and Head of Department of Museology at MSU, and she is also the board member of ICOM, the Secretary of ICOM India, and board member of ICOM ASPAC, and member also of the Commonwealth Association of Museums. We also have Bryan Robertson joining us from National Galleries of Scotland. Bryan has a 20-year career in leading organisational change and improvement in a wide range of sectors, and joined National Galleries of Scotland in 2018 as the Chief Operating Officer. From Poland, we have Piotr Rypson, Professor of Polish-Japanese Academy of Information Technology and Curator Expert at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. And from Singapore, Nicola Mah, an Assistant Manager at the International Museum Relations Division of the National Heritage Board. So we look forward to your contributions. We have divided the session into 5 themes. The first is on buildings and collections. We have organised this with some indication of the individuals who might be able to initially tackle these questions, but it will be open to the wider panel to also contribute to that. So the first theme is buildings and collections. Our first question. What needs to be done or has been done strategically and practically to reopen? Bryan, might I put some of that to you initially?
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, well, as Duncan said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer looking after the National Galleries of Scotland based in Edinburgh, though working from home in a sunny Gleneagles today. What we've done for the galleries is we've done a walk round of each of the buildings to understand how it's going to be safe for visitors to come back, thinking about the 2-metre social distancing that we are currently working to in the UK and Scotland. And that allows us to understand which of the buildings can be opened and when, but also which of the rooms can be opened and when, because some of the rooms we're not going to open. So for example, in the National Gallery in Princes Street in Edinburgh, we're only going to open the ground floor. We're not going to open the upper floor. So that's really important to understand what we can open safely. But that walk round has been really important because it's allowed us to understand where are the pinch points. So possibly outside toilets or into meeting areas, etc. So making sure we understand that and how we'll marshal that with the customer service staff as well. In terms of making adjustments, clearly we'll be putting up perspex screens to protect visitors and staff as they come into the buildings or are dealing with tickets, etc. But using as much contactless, cashless transactions as possible, whether it's taking money for tickets or if it's giving out any information as well. So there's been quite a lot of changes happening to the buildings so we can get ready to open. We are planning to open early August, but we'll do that in a phased manner over our 4 buildings, which will take us right through until October.
Okay, thank you, Bryan. Peter, anything you'd care to add to that from your experience?
Yes, I think we have already 1 month behind us since the museums were allowed to be opened in the country. And of course, the situation changes from museum to museum depending on the space and the type of museum, staffing and so forth. However, first thing is you won't get into a Polish museum without a mask on your face and without using the sanitation liquids that are provided at the entrance. And you have to keep a safe distance from the cashier's desk. And some museums decided to give free entry tickets since what we've been experiencing in most of the galleries and museum institutions, that we get 1/10 of visitors compared to what was happening, say, at the end of last year or in January. So this creates, of course, a great problem in terms of incomes, personnel, rationality of using resources in a situation where in many institutions, or most institutions, you have a limit of 1 to 2 persons per room, keeping safe distance and allowing for fluid passage through doorways. To keep up such infrastructure with larger museums, especially, where the visitors daily may amount to to 20 or 30 people. I was at a museum in another city yesterday, and I was the only visitor on 2 floors of a huge national museum. So that's a huge problem. There is a number of very precise sanitation guidelines and safety guidelines in terms of in case a visitor was identified as being sick with coronavirus, or with situations where a visitor may suddenly have a fever rush or may faint in the museum. And in these situations, we have most of the recommendations are that you have to have a special room in the museum where such a person can be placed until an ambulance, etc., arrives, and a set of regulations which may vary from museum to museum. What happens both with the room and the objects and items in the room after such a situation occurs? So there are designed places in some museums where museum objects which cannot be sanitized with alcohol or with other liquids, they have to be kept in quarantine there for a minimum 7 days. And this quarantine may be prolonged to 2 weeks probably. This is a little bit similar to what happens in libraries, with books being returned by readers, where books are usually kept in a quarantine for a couple of days or so. And one thing, one very practical thing to that is that elevators are usually restricted, the usage of elevators, only to elders and to disabled, because these are small places where, well, the virus can find its breeding ground. And similarly, staircases are being, well, maybe not redesigned, but specific places where people can sit to wait or stand to wait for others going down or going up. So there is no physical contact or no direct physical contact between the visitors. This is more or less the practicalities or some of the practicalities that we've been going through.
Thank you for that contribution. That's very illuminating. I'm very conscious of time. We have a number of questions in this section to go through. If I can move on to the next question around collections. Do you have a collections care plan in place for reopening? And if so, what are the key issues which have had to be addressed? And I think if I might take this one to you, Nicola.
Hi, yes. So I'm Nicola from Singapore, and just to give a bit of an overview, so in Singapore, actually, our museums and heritage institutions have been closed since 7th of April, and following the announcement of actually a countrywide, what we call circuit breaker, so during the lockdown period, which was actually scheduled to end in 4th of May. So since then, actually, there have been phased reopenings for our museums, and it's really apt that I'm here, and thank you for having me, because actually our museums are going to start reopening tomorrow. So it's quite a great time to be here. And the reopenings also take part in phased stages. So the national museums are the first ones to actually be reopening. They're leading the way. And actually we've allowed museums to reopen contingent on the submission of their safety management plans. So our team is the one that is actually going through all these plans to make sure that they adhere to a set of guidelines and advisories that have been vetted through at the ministerial level. So actually my team has been coordinating the sort of responses that come out from the museums with regard to how the advisories are being operationalized on the ground. So with regard to collections care specifically, actually, most of our conservation care actually is carried out at the Heritage Conservation Center. And that is also going to be reopened in phase stages as well. So actually the large areas of collections care when we're looking at a plan for reopening was really on three parts. One is on managing contaminated collections and spaces where there might be cases of contamination. The second one is also the continued risk management, which has been taking place pre-COVID, during COVID lockdown, as well as hopefully post-COVID as well. And of course, the third one is re-entry practices. So not only on the part of the safety of our collections, but also the people who are actually carrying out collections care work. So we do actually have a nationwide advisory that is issued by the Ministry of Health regarding safe workplaces, which we adhere to, and also adapt accordingly to the context of a heritage care center. So things like safety distancing is part of this, having masks, gloves during this time as well are some of the resources that we provide our staff with. And I think something that we did give a lot of consideration to is the idea that everyone at every single level is very well briefed on the different stages and the different actions that you would need to take with regard to reopening. So for example, there is a representative, a designated representative who would be in charge of safety measures, and they have to be the most well-equipped with the skills of what to do in case there's a contamination case, and also what are the next courses of action to take should there be risk mitigation that is needed urgently and on an emergency basis. So yes.
Okay, thank you for that, Nicola. And just a follow-on question in relation to object handling. Have you explored how that can be maintained in social distancing conditions?
Yes, so actually the Heritage Conservation Center has been looking at designating very key area zones that have to be isolated. So during this time there isn't that much of movement between artifacts to begin with because of the air travel restrictions. And actually what is happening is that the artifacts that we have loaned for some of our previous or past exhibitions have been extended to stay with us. So the issue is really about identifying the areas in the center, which could be designated as isolation areas, and in which case artifacts that have the potential to be contaminated should be left there for a couple of days. And that really depends, of course, on the artifact and the materials that they're made out of. But there is a period, of course, that we will wait for the virus to be deactivated. And for these days, we actually do refer to scientific papers and try to come up with a plan with the different tiers of artifacts that come up out of it. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm very conscious that the time is slipping away and we have another 4 themes to explore. So if we can move on now to staff. The first question we have is how should staff be protected when they return to the building and what measures need to be in place for them? Ambika, might I come to you first for that one, please?
Okay. Good afternoon for everybody. Good morning for you. And in India, we have the good afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. And thank you for giving me, inviting me and giving me this platform to share the ideas and share the issues and share the incidents from India. So when you ask about the staff, let me take you one point back where, we in India have different types of museums. Some of them are newly built, some of them are the historic monuments which has been translated into museums. So we have, we are actually planning to open up in phase-wise. So the first thing is preparedness of the staff, like creating awareness among the staff, how to take care of the security measures, the protocols, how to maintain social distancing. So preparedness of the staff was the first thing. So we actually, many of the museums in India started with administration and security first as the first phase, and taking care of the building. Your first question, going back to your first question, first was taking care of the building because it is opening after 30 days and some of them are after 45 days. So clearance and cleaning and sanitization of the building, and then moving on, creating awareness and preparedness for facing this situation for the staff to come to the museum and take care of the collection. And then now moving on, creating some awareness among the staff for their mental preparedness, how to deal with the visitors and how to take, because many of the museums, they were never accessible through digital media. So, the focus is different because some of them are focusing on inventorizing and, documenting their collection. Some of them are focusing on, other aspects of making an online exhibition so that they are already digitally available, but making more accessible to the society. Anyway, in India, everywhere I think the issue is same because the tourists are not coming. So you have to focus more on the local visitors who are coming. So I think, so they are also aware of the COVID situation. The staff is also aware of the COVID situation. And the staff is only now, 30% of the staff is allowed to come. And there is a schedules for, because some museums are now opening from 1st of June. They are already open from 1st of June. Some are opening from 1st of July. So they are in phase wise. So we are in a different level of, facing COVID by reopening in different stages. Yes, staff has been trained how to take care of themselves, maintaining the social distancing, how the sanitization could be done, how the public spaces like restaurants and toilet areas and the ticketing areas to be, how the visitors to be treated, and how to give them indications of movements in smaller areas and smaller spaces, because some museums, the historic palaces converted to museums, have narrow spaces for accessing different galleries. And also, as Bryan said, we are also going by opening only one key gallery, and the rest will be open, once we getting into the better stage. So I think in Indian cases, we have variety of, things to see and variety of stages we are operating. Yes.
Thank you very much, Ambika. I have a question coming from the audience. They're particularly interested in how volunteers can be managed through this process. So would any of the panel care to pick up on that question specifically?
Hi, if I may.
Nicola.
Yeah. So actually, during the lockdown period, of course, public tours have all been cancelled. Actually, in the reopening phases, we have actually done an internal decision that public tours cannot resume as of yet until further review, given the high contact that's between guides. And this has really been quite a sticky issue for some of our smaller museums, for which guides are actually the main operations that they hold in their spaces. So that's been really tight. And what we've actually done is we've taken some of these consultation sessions and the feedback that we've gotten from them to try and push for the resumption of public tours, but in much smaller groups. And of course, adhering to the safe measurements that have been stated in the advisories. And that's still an ongoing discussion, and that's really the importance of having our engagement sessions. In terms of training, we've actually opened up webinars that we hold locally to try and educate the different museum guides to say what is actually going on in museums internationally, and what are some of the best practices that they could look to adopting. So it's really more of a, we give you the information and we provide you that sort of international scan that you might not be able to see through entirely on your own, and we're really here as a network, so that when you are ready to come back to the museums and volunteer or work as a guide, we'd be very happy to welcome you into our spaces again, and that's what we're really trying to build on.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any other contributions on that subject before we move on to the next question?
I think in India, the volunteering program is, I think we are still on hold. So possibly one step by step, everything is open. as he rightly said, maybe it will resume. So right now, I think nothing on that.
Okay, thank you. The next question around staff is just to ask what actions you're taking to try to retain sector staff in the face of COVID.
Can you hear me okay, Duncan?
Yes, we can hear you, Brian.
Sorry, I think building on the last point and this point, the involvement and engagement of staff as we go through this process is really, really important, because there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen to them personally, and is it going to be safe for them to come back to the galleries and museums, but also what's the future hold as well. So I think the work that we're doing in terms of involving the staff and the unions is really important. So we're doing full risk assessments of the buildings so we can understand how do we bring staff back safely. And then how do we create new operational processes and HR policies to make sure that staff are reassured that it's going to be safe for them to come to work and how they interact with visitors. And then we'll create a reorientation plan so that before they actually get into the building, we'll give them an update on all of these things to reassure them about what's the new processes as well. So that whole working with people, consulting them, making sure they understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, taking their questions and responding. You can't communicate enough right now with staff to make sure that they're engaged. But I think there's another important point for engagement, which is right now an awful lot of us are just focusing on reopening, which is fully understandable because that is what we need to think about. But I think some people are finding it quite exhausting. The unknown of how do we deal with childcare, home working, what's the future going to hold for the galleries. So I think there also needs to be time allowed for focusing about the future. Because if you focus on the future, it gets people to see beyond where they are now. So we're beginning to try to run sessions on reimagining the future. What's the role of the gallery and the health and well-being of society? It's a challenge not just for us, but for every country, I would imagine. So it's trying to get people thinking about, yes, we've got the plans in place that will reassure you, but we also need to think about what's going to happen in the future. How do we reimagine the role of the galleries? Because I think a lot of people will try and just run back to the way it always was, but this is an opportunity to say, well, actually, what's the opportunity for the future for us and how we work with our staff and how we work with our visitors? So even though it's a challenge, I think it's actually can be quite an exciting time to reimagine what those opportunities might look like, and that will hopefully engage and retain the staff as well.
Thank you, Brian. And I see other panelists nodding when you're speaking there. So there are further contributions on that particular topic internationally, perhaps, about retaining staff. Ambika, you seem to agree with some of Brian's comments?
Yeah, because some of the museums have created some guidelines depending on their special needs. So training, basically giving guidelines and orientation for the staff, how to get adjusted with the new normal. So, you know, how to go about with that, and then what are their roles now, you know, handling visitors possibly once we reopen patiently, by at the same time taking care of themselves, maintaining the protocols, following the procedures and practice. You know, some museums are actually making some guidelines as post-COVID best practice, COVID best practice. Many people are working on many things. So it's like everybody is working on based on the needs of their specific museum. So yes, some museums who already have opened in 1st of June, they actually opening it for 4 days. So 2 days towards the end of the week and the weekend, so that there is a kind of a trial and error, seeing how many people coming in. But yes, definitely there is a restriction for 50 people entering one, and then 5 or 6 people in one gallery, so that they track the movement and see how it is happening, and then taking care of the restricted areas, the administration areas, and other things. So there are some signage, some guidelines, new guidelines which have been listed out, and the staff has been trained to practice them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Peter, do you want to come in there?
Yes, I'd like to add and reinforce perhaps one thought. First of all, in most museums in Poland, which are operating half opened or fully opened since 4 weeks now, staff is rotating. So you usually have one fourth or 1/3 of staff in the museum physically, whereas the others are working online from home. Secondly, a big issue was that with with basically no income from tickets, from ticket sales and you know, bookstores, etc. And most of the cafes, restaurants in the museums are closed. The staff was asked to step in trying to you know, to act as keepers at the rooms, as people who oversee the public as well, because that's a very high cost. A lot of these employees who were guarding the exhibitions were not permanent employees. So a shift is taking place here, and that's a very, very problematic issue, not only because curators may feel uncomfortable with acting as guards, but first of all, because they start to operate as frontline people, just like in shops or you know, other places, and so they are endangered and exposed to the hazards of the virus. However, I think most museums are trying to work in the mode of business as usual. Smart museums in Poland are trying to reinvent themselves, because I think it's you know, the most silly thing is to pretend you know what to do. Most people do not know what to do. Most governments do not know what to do. And I think it's a very, very good moment to rethink your missions and your operations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've had a question related to this from the audience, in fact, asking if any institutions have put staff mental health support in place, either now or during return to work. Ambika.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll come to you more, Bryan. Ambika?
Yeah, I think, but let Bryan go. I'll follow him.
Okay.
Bryan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it clearly is a challenge. I think some people are finding it a real challenge to work from home and deal with childcare, etc., and not be in touch with people and not be in touch with the art. So we're definitely seeing it as an issue. So what we've created is a program called The Art of Wellbeing, where every week we have a theme about reconnecting or pausing to be present. But we've also, for example, given a day back to staff. So what we said one day is, right, we're going to have no emails. So it meant you could take the day out, so that when you came back, there was no emails to worry about. I think these things are really important, but it's also simple things, because people are saying they're in too many meetings. One of the things we're challenging teams to do is to say, rather than have a 1 hour meeting, make sure it finishes at 45 minutes. So you get that 15 minutes back to think about actions, and make sure you take that 15 minutes sometimes just to go for a walk. So I think that the constant talking about well-being, how do we support each other, and even actually asking line managers to ask the question, how are you doing, is really, really important. For people to vocalize how they feel is really part of the healing process if they are challenged. So taking the time to ask how people are doing rather than just go straight into the meeting agenda is also really important. But this isn't just for this phase, I think is the questions asking. Let's make sure we're thinking about well-being of staff throughout this process and when we return, because it is going to be a challenging time for many people as they adjust to the new normal. And we need to make sure we're constantly paying attention to the well-being of our staff and the visitors as well.
Thanks, Bryan. Ambika, did you want to come in after Bryan?
Yeah. So it's like in some of the museums in India, they started doing workshops and online discussions on, you know, keeping mental health, and then doing yoga and then meditation and things like that, where people get more relaxation, and then, as Bryan said, you know, interacting and saying hi and see not the official matters, not the meetings, but, you know, kind of feeling, you know, they develop a feeling for, okay, they have been taken care of and they have been asked for their health and things like that. So there are some workshops, some online programs, some talks, not only from the museum side, but from the health ministry and the Ministry of tourism also are doing a lot of programs in terms of, you know, mental health and discussions and giving them guidelines on top of how to take care of themselves, safety measures, what type of masks should be wear, and then how to keep social distancing. So there are many programs which is happening not only from the museum sector, but the parallel multidisciplinary sectors where we are connected with hospitality industry and tourism and things like that. So I think many of the museums are doing different kinds of activities in terms of well-being and mental health.
Okay, thank you very much. If we can now move on to the next theme, which is around programme. So our first question here, what content is needed to support and react to COVID-19? Nicola, might I come to you on that one initially, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we are all trying to wrap our heads around. There's a lot of discussion about digital fatigue that's come out actually, because since the lockdown, there's been such a surge in everyone pivoting their programs to go online. You know, how can we actively reach out to our audiences through social media? How can we still deliver the same kind of museum experiences? And I think the main takeaway out of a lot of the discussions that we've had is that there is this move towards it, talking about the future as well. So not just post-COVID, but beyond this whole lockdown period, whether we can move towards even a hybrid model. So I think it's quite exciting during the lockdown that, you know, everyone is trying to bid out ideas in terms of digital side. And we are quite lucky that actually a lot of the funding support, in addition to the job support schemes that we do have, also look at digital skills, so upgrading digital skills, but also digital projects. So we actually have 2 fund schemes on that for museums specifically, and that's part of a larger funding package as well. But I think, you know, there's this idea that, at least from the museum staff part, I suppose I could share this more personally, you know, when a lot of your work is done through screens, and then you have to go to enjoy museums collections on screens, and then your family time is also very much mediated by screen time. That's actually a real struggle, and it's something that we've observed. So hopefully, I think there is actually a lot of excitement being built up for when people can physically resume their activities at the museums themselves, and we're really looking forward to that. Yeah.
Peter, you want to contribute?
Yes, I'd like to touch on 2 points. One is that, you know, we felt a little bit trapped by the digital dimension, because obviously everything went digital in March, and for some sectors of the cultural industry, theaters, for example, it made sense because it enlarged greatly their audiences, tenfold, hundredfold. Suddenly, instead of an audience of 800, you had an audience of 8,000, and that, of course, was very good for audience building. I don't think that works that well for museums. So, one thing that we suggested to the, especially to municipal museums that are more under respective cities than the government, is that they try to work with the education departments in the municipalities, since schools are going also through a very difficult process. They don't have enough space to keep social distancing for children. 2 meters in a class is unattainable. So the idea here was to trying to use both museum spaces and museum holdings as resources for education programs. So for one day at a school could be taken, you know, or a couple of hours could have to take place in a museum, etc., etc. And some museums are actually working on that right now, because it seems that in autumn, children will not be able to go back to school again. It is a high possibility. So we have to try to, you know, bring together both resources and space to help, you know, to help the society somehow find their way out of this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have one further question in this section. Practically, what can be delivered post-COVID in museum spaces? Who would like to start off on that one? Brian.
Yeah, kind of building on some of the conversation there a minute ago, I think we're having to rethink our programme as well. We had some ambitious programmes that we've actually said we don't think it's the right time, so we made some difficult decisions to cancel programmes, our own programmes, and really focus on the permanent collection. and the experience of coming back into galleries and museums. I think that's going to be important, just to be there, because if you think about it, a lot of the visitors who we'd normally rely on are international, and that's not going to come back for a number of years. So focusing on the locals and different parts of the local community is going to be really important. We also see that there'll be a staycation where some people from other parts of the UK will travel to Scotland. I think that's going to be important. But I think the use of spaces is something you've mentioned as well. So we're lucky to have some incredible grounds in a couple of our galleries, and we've got sculptures there. And that's the first part that we want to open up, is making sure that we're providing that access to open space, because people coming back are probably going to feel more secure by coming into an open space and just being there rather than go straight into the museum and the gallery. So that'll be the first thing that opens for us. One thing that the team have come up with, which I'm really excited about, is we want to ask the community, what has 2020 meant to them? Not just COVID, but what has 2020 meant to them, and in a pictorial way. So them sharing their own artwork of what it has meant is going to be interesting, and that's an exhibition we want to put on, obviously, with our local community. And I think that's going to be interesting, getting people to think about what this whole experience has meant to them, distancing from family or being close to family, or what have they now appreciated which they might not have appreciated in the past. So I'm really excited about how that's going to evolve as well.
Thank you. Any other contributions to that topic? Ambika,
Yeah. So again, in Indian context as well, many of the museums are focusing on the local communities because they are the people close to us. So, you know, building faith in them, and so that they could be sometimes possibly the industrialists, and some of their lives could be supporting some projects, as you know, they could give some funds, though the government has, you know, the federal government is giving some funds, but there possibly we are expecting there may be some cuts for the financial support, but the project which is running possibly will go on. But many of the museums are also focusing on COVID stories, you know, collecting things, materials related with COVID, and how COVID has been, you know, affected the community, what are their reflections. So some the artist group with some artistic representations, paintings, drawings, and sculptures, and other people with the material for they use different kinds of masks and other things. So some museums are working on the artistic reflections and representations of COVID. So they are working more on the exhibition, some on collecting material, and possibly that could be one collection for them for further. Some are continuing with the project which is already available to them. Some museums is definitely focusing more on collection management and inventories, because in India, if you look, there were smaller museums who were never digitally on. So they got an opportunity to come on the surface, maybe through Instagram or social media with one object and its story. So they also have a digital appearance and online access. At the same time, the bigger museums who are already on internet platforms. So definitely, as Nicola said, they are all digital fatigue. So there is different situations in India. You know, some are coming up, some are saturated, but still everybody is trying to face the difficult situations and try to overcome with positive approach and mindfulness and good attitude.
Okay, thank you very much. If we can now move on to our next theme in audiences, and we have started to touch on this already in some of the responses from the panel. How does the sector encourage visitors back to museums, and who might those visitors be? Ambika, you want to kick off on that one?
No, I missed the question. Can you repeat it once?
The question was, how can the sector encourage audiences to return, and who might those audiences be?
Oh, that's a big problem that what we are facing, every one of us is facing. But of course, I think every museum is now focusing, as Bryan also said, you know, the neighborhood, the local. So everything for the local, because the internationals are not going to come for coming at least 1 year. So starting with the community project, more interaction with the people. Yes, definitely developing feeling of trust, faith, safe environment is definitely an issue. I think many of the museums are working on interactive programs to convince the visitors. I think we really need to do a lot, because I'm not able to comment more on that. Possibly Bryan or Nicola could, if they have any specific guidelines for their museum.
Bryan, do you want to step in there?
Yeah, I think like what we said earlier on about reassuring staff and being able to return to the galleries, museums, it's also really important to reassure visitors that it's going to be safe. So a big part of what we'll be doing is putting out marketing and communication to say, right, here's the new processes, here's what to expect. And we will be working on the basis that people will have to pre-book to be able to get in. And that allows us to manage the numbers as well. So, but when you think about how do we reassure, it's one thing to say we've got new signage, it's one thing to say we've got new processes, but actually when they see what people are doing differently, I think it's going to be really important. So for example, one proposal was that we should stop at lunchtime and close the gallery down and do a clean at that time. But actually there was a perception that actually what we should do is keep cleaning all the time so that visitors see that we're cleaning. So that ability to see what we're doing is really important. Mm-hmm. Another idea we're exploring is to have clear visors, because we think it's important that visitors see the expression of our staff as well, because they can be reassured by that. Clearly there might be some people who are deaf, so you need to be able to understand how we interact with people who can lip read. So it's thinking about a whole range of different things from that aspect as well.
Thank you, Brian. Any other contributions from that in terms of audiences, how we make audiences feel safe and engaged? Nicola, would you like to comment on that?
I think in general, we talk a lot about making audiences feel safe enough to return to museums, and I think it's about like stepping up the cleaning processes. But I think at the end of the day, we are also asking ourselves, what do our local audiences want? And in Singapore, actually, we've seen such a drastic drop in our museum visitorship, mainly because we're so reliant on foreign visitors. And I think we've really taken this time to sort of reflect inwards and try to focus on really local stories. So in terms of the collection efforts for COVID-19 related stories, we actually wanted to align it more to get people to share about their own personal stories and to really feel part of that process of creating something, as opposed to just looking forward to the next so-called blockbuster exhibition. Why can't our local stories be the blockbuster exhibition? And I think that's that real pivot on that. But I did have a question actually, which is that I've been looking around in the different countries that do try to survey their local audiences of preferences and what they want. We have not reached a stage where we're doing that just yet, but we do have plans to. And I think it would be nice to also hear from some of the other speakers whether such surveys are being done and how has the responses of the museums been to that.
Interestingly, Nicola, you've preempted the very next question, so that leads us nicely into the general section. So what steps have other countries taken to survey audiences and to ascertain what people actually want?
I have a negative answer here. I think, you know, the community here was so tied up with managing crisis that I can honestly say that there was not enough work done in that area. So I do not have a good answer for that. But I'd like to show you one case which we had in Poland 2 weeks ago. One of our two biggest national museums in Krakow opened with an interesting exhibition, and a day later it was discovered that one member of the mounting team at the museum was infected with COVID, and they had to lock down the whole museum the next day after opening. And what I think they experienced was mainstream countrywide news about a critical situation in the museum, and total silence later about, you know, reopening or safety, etc., etc. So I think our community has this danger of dealing with situations which can be blown up dramatically by the media with an incident that probably just scares the audience away, and it's going to be very, very difficult to rebuild the feeling of safety, and that's something that's worthwhile to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I know there's been significant surveying of audience sentiments in the UK. Is that something you might be able to share a little insight on for the audience here?
Yeah, I think Alba have done a great piece of work where they're actually assessing, what are the things that visitors are looking for to return, and what's going to reassure them as well. And a big part of it actually does come back to the point I made earlier on. They're wanting reassurance that it's safe, and they're wanting reassurance that we're taking the measures that's required. But one of the questions which I thought was interesting was, what's your likelihood to return, or what's your interest in returning? And a few weeks back, that was only 9% of people said they are intending to come soon. That's now gone up to maybe 12 or 15%. So there's this thing that people will come back, but not many. But then it will grow over time, where people will say, right, okay, I get to see that actually this is going to work. So we see that's possibly going to build up. So this whole need of reassurance, and I think that reassurance has to come from us in terms of what we do and how we communicate. But we've also reached out to the government, because I think the government's done a good job of saying, stay home, stay safe. But they now need to reassure us that it's safe to go out as well. So I think that reassurance needs to come from a number of different directions.
Ambika.
Yes. Can I answer? Okay. So in India, as Bryan said, the message is stay safe, stay at home. And the number of COVID is increasing in India, the number of cases in major cities of Delhi and Mumbai, and we have the main museums of the major metropolitan cities. So as Peter said, let me frankly accept, I am not sure that how many museums done a survey, because we are really finding it difficult to manage the present situation. So, going for a visitor survey and then doing the feedback and all, possibly maybe a next stage. So at the stage of government giving a message of stay home, stay safe, and we are slowly managing the situation. The number of COVID cases are increasing. So these are situations, I think, while we are reimagining the road, further down the line, I feel we really have to look for visitor surveys. I don't think we have done anything on that one.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And moving on through this section, the next question we have is, what has been the biggest challenge you've faced, either in reopening the museums or in planning to reopen?
I'll try
Peter.
Just to give two answers to that. One, I think for every museum director, it's really very difficult to design the work processes for staff, especially in bigger museums where you have a couple of hundred employees or more, and most of them do not have any direct access to artworks, to the museum items. So a lot of the everyday museum activities are becoming quite abstract, and that's one big issue, I think, that we have. Second is economical. With such a decrease of staff, and also with the economy of the country in danger, it's almost impossible to invest in serious new exhibition projects to attract audiences. So as it has been said, I think Bryan said that I think there has to be a lot of work done around permanent exhibitions, trying to use these as the main motor for museums who do have serious permanent collections on view. Some of them do not have them on display to that extent. So I think these are the two factors that is just too costly to keep the operation going with such low participation of visitors, unless you have other sources of income than what you get, from the box office or from restaurants and bookstores, etc., shops. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other additions to that topic? Bryan.
Yeah, I think for those of us who are involved, because like many organisations, we've got something like 40% of our staff on furlough, so they're not involved just now. Whereas some of us who are deeply involved in this and the planning, we know how much work needs to be done, and it's going to take time. So we've got a very, very detailed plan looking at all the interdependencies. But if you're not involved in that, people are going, well, why are you wanting to take so long? Because in theory, we could open on the 15th of July. but we know it's going to take a bit longer to put things in place to make sure it's safe for visitors and staff. And I think that challenge of balancing planning out and taking the time to do it safely, whilst people have got the pressure and expectation that actually they want you to come back early, that balancing is really important. So it's not to rush to be open, it's actually let's make sure we open in a phased, safe manner. And then when we do open, that's not the end of it, it's actually how do we test and learn and continue to improve. You know, I think when we're going to open, our capacity we think is going to be 20% of normal, but that's in terms of creating the safe routes. But as was mentioned earlier on, what we don't know is how many visitors are going to come back. If it's 10%, well, okay, that's okay. But we need to understand how do we look and test our new approaches to make sure it's safe, and then how do we increase that capacity safely as well. So I think the tension of being able to match the timeline and the expectations is a challenge, and keeping everybody involved and engaged, whether it's the staff who are on furlough or the staff who are not involved in the reopening, but also our visitors and also our stakeholders. A lot of the suppliers rely on us as well. Contractors rely on us, is making sure they understand what we're doing and when it's safe to come back to work. But it's an interesting challenge to work with, and I think the momentum is beginning to build to get people get back to the galleries, and it's going to be a positive move. But it's always about continuing learning and improving. Thank you. Ambika, you want to come in there?
Yeah, because when you look at the Indian scenario, we have, as I said in the beginning, we have variety of museums. So, you know, approaches are different. As Bryan said, some of them like 40% staff. So some of them are heavily involved in the post-COVID reopening, planning and development stage. Some of them are not aware of it. So once they join us, possibly that's a big exercise to make them understand and, you know, make them aware and practice it. So we are facing challenges of making best practices, but still we are testing whether it works or not. At the same time, we have the confidence building and trust developing exercise to do with the visitor. Same time, many of the museum manage with the fund, because as you know, we see the cafeteria is closed, the restaurants are closed, the public spaces where 3D Max and other things were happening, that's closed. So I think we are all experimenting with different models, and then, you know, some hybrid models, as Nicola said, some with digital marketing. So you market your product through digital platforms and earn some money to support some supply, and then, you know, different approaches has been adopted by various museums. Those museums with federal funded ones, they are more safe because there is no staff cut, no fund cut, so they are possibly opening up and doing perhaps in a better manner. But the smaller museums, the museums which were absolutely depending on the footfall and the visitors and the ticket money, I think possibly they really have to strategize and make a new model to come up with, you know. And maybe some of the museums, to attract the visitors, they are giving free entry for the beginning some days, and then slowly things are changing, they could charge. So they are even trying with that experiment as well. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We have a question coming in from the audience, just asking if museum services are or are planning to keep contact details for visitors, potentially as part of our track and trace system.
So just to share this, we have this in Singapore. It's not just exclusive to museums, but actually all public venues. We make use of this tracing. I can't call it technology. It's more like it's a page that people log into, and we call it safe entry. In addition to that as well, every venue is actually encouraged to have a one entrance and one exit flow. So as to reduce the double counting and any kind of mix-ups on that. So actually for museums, for them to reopen, they do have to have safe entry in place. So that involves scanning a QR code before you enter the museums, and you check in on your own device. Alternatively, you could check in on a device that is provided by the museums themselves for those people who may not have their own handheld devices. And as they exit the building as well, they're supposed to check out. So that would log in the coming in and going out of the different visitors at any point in time of the day. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we are nearly at the end of the session. I think we'd move to the final really significant question. What do you think the future of your museum or sector will be post-COVID-19? We have 3 minutes left, so I can ask panelists to be brief on this one, please. I'll take you in the order of my screen rather than any other particular order. So Peter, that would put you on first.
Very difficult question. And, you know, I do not dare really to answer. I think some museums will take the opportunity, will reinvent themselves, and will probably shift more in the direction of more participatory type of institutions, to generalize it, you know, to the greatest extent. And that's what I can say. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Nicola, could I come to you next, perhaps?
Yeah, so of course, hybrid models everywhere. I think that's the next buzzword that everyone's going to look at. But also with that, actually, hopefully, new ways of measuring our outcomes. Whether is it just going to be about visitorship numbers at the museums itself, or can we look at other indicators of what it means to have successful museum programming? So I really look forward to that.
Okay, thank you. Ambika, could I come to you on that question, please?
Yes, yes. So I think many of the museums will like different strategies and different performances. Some will become more, you know, who never had digital access or online access. So they will focus more on accessibility and creating their identity to digital platforms. Some of the museums possibly will outreach the community. Smaller museums in the local will reach the community and tell the community history and stories. So try to explore more on their identity through fundraising and community outreach. The national level museums, definitely they will survive through their exhibitions and making it more online programs so that they could, you know, sustain for the difficult time. And then once the physical access is possible, I think, yes, virtual is not equated with the physical, you know, the real observance and the pleasure which comes by looking at the original object. So I think, so it's a course of facing the difficult time. We are all going to face this, and definitely we will overcome that through different measures.
Thank you very much. And any final comments from you, Bryan?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ambika.
Yeah, well, I'm always fascinated. I mean, the challenge just now is that we're in a major economic and health crisis. But as we come through that, we're going to have to find ways to overcome where we are now. And I think galleries and museums have got an integral part to play. If you think about the ability to visit a museum and gallery and see it as a piece of tranquility, but also a place where you can actually be inspired to think about what you can do with your own life, or what you can do in business, or what you can do in your society. I think we need to think about what part we can play to help society grow and recover in a way. I think the other thing is I'd like to think about is that through this process, there's been an amazing amount of collaboration. This is a great example where we're all sharing around the world our experiences, where we're ahead in Poland and we're about to go in Scotland and Singapore and India. I think this whole aspect of collaboration across this society is a great example that we need to not lose. And we need to do more of this to keep sharing what's working well, what the challenges are, and what the future holds for us as well. So be a catalyst for change.
Great sentiment to end on, Bryan. Thank you very much. I'd just like to thank the panelists, Peter, Nicola, Ambika and Bryan, for their time and for their insight and contributions today. That's been really valued by the audience. Thank you everybody for listening. I'd also like to thank Claire, Dana and Jilly behind the scenes who kept all this running and made it work, and many thanks to them. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a very good day.
Yeah,
and please
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Namaste.
Thank you, Duncan.